kept right on going. I became involved in the case in Nebraska. It's called the Franklin cover-up. And in that particular case, I learned that there was an international child kidnapping ring operating out of Iowa and Nebraska. They had the Franklin Savings and Loan was raided by the IRS and the FBI. As a result of the publicity, 80 children came forward and said that they were victims in a large-scale pedophile ring. Of the 80 who came forward, 4 gave statements, 2 recanted, 2 refused to recant, Alicia Owens and Paul Benassi. The 2 refused to recant. I went back and interviewed them. I talked to them. I helped develop the case. The investigator before me was murdered, by the way, and I didn't really replace him because he was a full-time investigator, and John DeCamp had just asked me to come back and kind of fill in until we could, work it more extensively. But we learned from talking to these kids that this large-scale pedophile ring was not only involved in pedophilia, they were involved in pornography, they were involved in satanic cult activity. The kids attended these ceremonies with robes chanting, human sacrifices, and these were not dirtbags off the street. This was the past publisher of the Omaha World Herald. This was the chief of police, Bob Wadman. This was the head of the Nebraska Forestry Service, Eugene Mahoney. These kids named all these individuals, some of the top citizens in Omaha, Nebraska. So the case went actually nowhere. The main agency that blocked it, kept it from going forward, was the FBI. But they were taking these kids out of orphanages, foster homes, Boys Town. They were driving them in private limousines from Omaha, Nebraska to Sioux City, Iowa, placing them in private jets, flying them to Washington, D.C. For sex orgy parties with congressmen and senators. And, of course, they would blackmail the congressmen and the senators. Paul Benassi, one of the kids who was talking, told me about how when he was, by this time, he was about 21, 22 years old, told me how when he was 14, 15, 16, they would take him out and to a shopping mall, a park, a public place, to try to attract the kids over, his age, over near the car. The adults would grab them, make off with them, and put these kids in a safe house, and so forth. Paul told me, I asked him, I said, what do they do with these kids, Paul? He said, well, they auction them off, and he'd been to two locations, Las Vegas and Toronto, Canada. I said, how many auctions have you attended? He said, 6. And I said, how many kids were auctioned off at each one? He said, there were as few as 6 and as many as 36. I said, how much money do they get for one of these kids? They sell for $50,000. 36 times $50,000 is a bundle of money. What happens to the kids afterwards, Paul? They're used in satanic ceremonies. They're put on airplanes, foreigners that don't speak English, planes with no markings on them. Now, wait a minute, the FAA's got to be involved in that. We got planes coming in here with no markings? Huh? Or whatever. They're put in campers. They're sent overseas, probably for, well, I've been told, for body parts, for sex slaves, and what have you. In November the 7th, 1997, I was in Denver, Colorado on a lecture. We picked up information that an airplane with the children from Child Protective Services in the state of Colorado was serviced at Denver International Airport. There were 2 men and a female woman, and the fellow that serviced the airplane asked, what are those kids doing here? There were 210 kids. And she said, Child Protective Services, none of your business. The plane, he checked the manifest, the plane was going to New York to refuel and then going on to Paris, France. Big business, right? So Paul said that he was part of the kidnapping ring. There have been several attempts to kill Paul. John DeCamp, an attorney, filed a lawsuit against Larry King, who was the leader of the operation and the president of the Franklin Savings and Loan. Not Larry King live TV, but the black man. And he had $1 million judgment February the 9th of last year. Received $1 million judgment. So we do have some good documentation. I have the documentation paying the telephone company. I mean, the telephone company paying me. We got the $1 million judgment and so forth. So in addition to the Nebraska case, later in 1990, the spring of 1990, how many of you have heard of the McMartin case? McMartin case was a preschool, Manhattan Beach, California, longest trial in the history of the country, 2 years. The kids said that when they were dropped off in the morning by their parents, picked up at night, between that time they were victims of a satanic ceremony. There were tunnels under the school. They had witnessed human sacrifices. They were flown into the mountains for ceremonies. And of course, the authorities said that, well, these kids are all hallucinating. The kids claimed that there were these tunnels. They said that they told the authorities where the entrance was and everything else. The authorities went out there in 1987, couldn't find any tunnels. In the spring of 1990, I heard that the property had been sold from the McMartins and given to Danny Davis, the attorney, and he had sold it to a contractor. They were going to build an office building on the property. And so I went to the contractor. I said, would you do me a favor? Let me have that property for 2 weeks. And he said, yeah, but you got to sign liability. You got to sign a contract. Went to an attorney friend of mine, and he wrote up a contract. And I went out there, and at the end of 2 weeks, by the way, we couldn't document there had been tunnels under the school, but we did extend it up to 34 days. And right at the very beginning, we hired an archaeologist, Dr. Stickle from UCLA, and he brought his team of archaeologists out, and we found tunnels under the school that had been filled in. And the kids said that they were taken through these tunnels up into the triplex next door. There was a trap door in the bathroom. And they were placed in automobiles and transported out in the community, 2, 3, 4-year-old kids for prostitution purposes. And I found a book, by the way, in my research, how to have sex with babies, infants. And these people are sicko. The kids were telling the truth. There's no question about it.